Hey everybody, Shane Terrio back at you. Off the cuff. You know, I've been thinking about where to go with this channel. I don't know what to do anymore. So I'm just going to tell some stories and play some stuff. And, you know, man, we've been losing so many of the greats lately. We just lost Steve Cropper. I'll tell a couple stories in a sec about Steve Cropper. But I thought I'd talk a little bit about Dr. John. You know, I've been hearing this song in my head lately, and that song is called Something You Got, and Mac didn't write it. Dr. John, I call him Mac Rebenak, for those of that knew him. That song was written by the great Chris Kenner, a New Orleans legend who wrote a lot of songs, and you probably hadn't heard of him, but you've heard his songs. And you might go, man, Van Morrison, no, Wilson Pickett, but Chris Kenner did the original. Nothing wrong with the Wilson Pickett version at all. Maybe that was Steve Cropper, I don't know, on that tune. That's an equally classic version. But anyway, Mac used to love to play that song, and I absorbed a couple things from working with him, and I thought I'd share them with you. So, you know, I like to try to keep my channel a little unique, and I think it is unique because I didn't just study this stuff I'm showing you guys. I made my living with it. I still do, but that old school music, I played it for a long time. I was lucky to play it with the masters, the greats, and learn from the, you know, right from the well itself. And I first played that tune, Something You Got, with the Neville Brothers. That's kind of where I learned it. But then when I was working with Mac, he would do it a different way. I think Chris Kenner did it in D flat. Something you got. La, da, da. That's a lot higher. Neville's and Mac did it in G. There's a great live version of Mac doing it. So for those of you that don't know, before I get into the lesson, if you don't know much about what I do, I also produce and I write music and I compose. And I was lucky enough to, I did work with Dr. John, with Mac Rebenak, I call him Mac, on his last record. I worked with him as a guitar player as well, but I co-produced and wrote a lot of songs with him. And I got to work with him a lot. I produced a Ramsey Lewis, a couple songs for Ramsey Lewis, and I first got Mac in the studio at that point. But then he saw me as more in that role as just a guitar player, and that's kind of why he entrusted me to do his last record. That's a whole nother ball of wax. I'll tell that story one time on the channel. I've done it. It kind of wasn't, I mean, Mac, I loved Mac, and it was great, but when the record came out after he died, there was, let's just say, lawyers and music aren't always a good mix. You can find it in Rolling Stone magazine, did a whole article about that. I don't want to talk about that on this video. So let me show you some things. Like Mac had these great things, man, he would do. I remember the first time I ever met him, I was backstage in New York with the Neville Brothers. I was talking to Art Neville. I think I was 24. And Mac walks up and I go, wow, there's Dr. John. And Art goes, hey, this is our new guitar player. And Mac goes, where are you from? And I said, Raceland, Louisiana is a little town outside of New Orleans. Although I lived most of my life in New Orleans, I was born in Raceland. I grew up there. It's a little bayou town. And Mac just looked at me with his Swisher Sweet cigar, and he goes, Raceland? There ain't shit in Raceland. That's the first thing he ever said to me. But he had the greatest stories, man. And anyway, I remember that conversation. I'm getting to the guitar stuff, don't worry. I remember that conversation when he told Art, he goes, I used to be able to hit those tents, but that lithium fucked my hand up. And he was talking about tenths, intervals, these kind of things on piano with his right hand. And so if you're in G, this like to try to translate it for guitar. He did things like this. They're double stops, and you need to use pick and fingers to do it. So that's an F and a G at the same time. Fourth string and first string. We're going to use the first and fourth strings. And then you walk that up. That's a G and a B flat on top. And go up another whole step. A and C on top. And you bring that up another half step, you get the flat 5. That's a Macism right there. And then this kind of cliche piano thing, you know, these New Orleans guys invented that stuff, but now it's part of, it's as cliche as that is. And it's this. That's really tricky to do on a guitar. It's a piano roll. I did cover that in my book, New Orleans Funk Guitar. That's a hard one to teach, but it's basically what I'm doing is this. I'm in G, and I'm hammering on that major third, and then you roll up to the 5th fret, 3rd and 2nd string. And then you do it's a backwards roll with my pick. It's hard to do slow. So what I'm doing, the notes are this. I'm just kind of fingering in a G minor shape almost. And then you land on the C into that 3rd. That's one. And then another thing you would do is break up the chords. So like... That's just a 1. If we're in G, that's the root note and the major 3rd. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's the 10th. That lithium. Can't play that 10th. Those kind of things are very piano, really cool for guitar. And then, you know, I just remember all these great stories. This button, I wear it in honor of Mac. This was given out at his memorial service for the people that were invited. But man, I got a lot of good stories from him. You know, he was actually in the Wrecking Crew. A lot of people don't know this. When he was 21, he came out here to Los Angeles, and he became part of the early Wrecking Crew by way of a musician named Harold Baptiste, another one of the unsung New Orleans greats. And Harold came out here with Earl Palmer, who was another New Orleans drummer. Early on, that kind of was the architect for a lot of those rock and roll beats. Earl was famous for doing a swing and straight at the same time. You know, he would have his right hand doing the clack, clack, clack straight and swinging his ass off. Jack, 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 jack. So it would kind of sound like that early New Orleans rock and roll. And he came out here and played on records with Ritchie Valens and later Beach Boys and became one of the A-Team Wrecking Crew guys. But anyway, Mac was in the Wrecking Crew. And one day he was at my house when we were working on his record. We did a pre-production at my house. I had a studio set up in my house in New Orleans for a month. He would come over every day, had his whole rig set up, and we would just sit there and listen to records and talk. And this is... yeah, and so I found this clip of Mac online at Gold Star Studios it's like Hollywood, California, making a rock and roll record. And they showed the Wrecking Crew, and they panned the room in the back, and you can see Barney Kessel. There was another guitar player, I didn't know who he was, and you can clearly see Earl. I think Earl Palmer was there, and you could see Mac Rebennack with a cigarette and his signature goatee thing, and he's like 22 years old playing a 335. And it's just for a brief moment, but I couldn't believe it. It was like a time machine. And he's sitting right there with me, and I said, Mac, look, that's you, man. Look at that. And he just looked at me and went, yeah. He didn't care. I mean, you had to pull stories out of him. You know, he would talk about, yeah, I worked with John Lemon one time. I don't think the shit came out. You know, John Lennon, Joe Crocker. Yeah, Joe Crocker. I mean, so many great stories. I'm going to do a whole episode on just that, you know, one day. But, and anybody that knew Mac knows all his stories and all his Macisms, you know. For instance, the guitar, solo on Shaduki Doo, Art Neville. I asked Art Neville about it, and he said the speaker was broken or the tube was broken, and that's why it sounded so funky. We had to leave it like that. That's what Art Neville told me. It's one of the earliest examples of like a really ratty kind of guitar solo, way before the Kinks. And I asked Mac about it, and Mac goes, "Oh, I remember that session, and that was the first guitar solo that ever was recorded with extortion." So get out your extortion pedals. But this kind of tone, he loved that kind of ratty tone. And he loved Howard Roberts. I brought over I had a Howard Roberts one day, and he was playing, and he goes, "Man, where you get that guitar? That's a Howie Roberts." I said, "Mac, Howard Roberts?" He goes, "I used to make sessions with him." Mac was on a session, a Frank Zappa session with Howard Roberts when he first came out here to LA, and he ended up getting fired from it. Told me the story, and he goes, "I liked it, Frank, but he had me playing these high shit all day. Ching, 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 ching. I couldn't take it. I left." So Frank sued him because it was a union date. And, I don't know what their relationship was after. I think Frank wrote a song called The Hoodoo Guru, man. It's kind of about Mac. But Mac is credited on, I think, the Freak Out record, Mothers of Invention. A lot of people don't know that. Anyway, let's see what else we could talk about. And one day, Mac was at my house, and he'd always, when we were working on his record, he'd always go, "I got to go to the head." He wasn't take a leak. It was go to the head. And my house in New Orleans has a really long hallway, and there's a bathroom on the back left. So on the way, there's like a bookshelf with some books, and I had this book out, Dr. John, Under a Hoodoo Moon. I had gotten it years ago, but I was kind of revisiting it while we were working together. And I had another book. John Oates had given me his book as well. So I had those two books. And Mac looks at his book, Dr. John, and he goes, "Man, I wish I'd never written that book." I said, "Why not, Mac?" And he goes, "Man, the people that I didn't talk about got pissed off that I left them out. The people that I talked about got pissed off that I talked about them." And he goes, "And some people threatened to sue me. I had to take them out of the book." And he goes, "What a mess." But it's a funny book. And I got him to sign this years ago when I was with the Nevilles. We were touring together. I've got all kinds of little souvenirs like this with him. But another funny story, I remember him, he told me, he had a great memory too at times. And he looked at John Oates' book, and he goes, "John Oates." I said, "Mac, you know who that is? That's who I work with. I work with Daryl and John." He goes, "I know who they are. I was supposed to play on their record." I said, "Really? What record is that?" He goes, "I don't know." And I said, "Well, what happened?" And he said, "Well, let's just say anytime I went into an office with Ahmed Erdogan, some bad shit would happen." That's all he said, right? So a couple weeks later, I see Daryl Hall, and Daryl's got a great memory. Could remember everything like it was yesterday. And I told him I was working with Dr. Johnny, and I said, "Hey, man, by the way, he was at my house and picked up Oates' book, and he made this comment about he was supposed to play on a record." And Daryl goes, "Oh, yeah, Abandoned Luncheonette. He was supposed to play B3 on Abandoned Luncheonette." I said, "Really? What happened?" He goes, "I don't know. We had a meeting, and it was at Ahmed Erdogan's office, and we walked out, and we were walking in the village together, and Mac turned to me, and he goes, 'You got a light?' And I gave him a light, and I never saw him again." So there you go. Another thing about that Wrecking Crew video, the guy playing, there was another guy playing guitar who I didn't know, and Mac looked at it, and he looked at himself, and he goes, "I bought that guitar from James Burton." I said, "Wow, 330, that 335? He goes, "Yep, James Burton." I said, "Wow, who's going to ever know this shit? It's the coolest stuff ever." And he said the other guy's name was like Don Peak or something. I looked him up, and sure enough, he was a Wrecking Crew guy, not as famous, but yeah. So a lot of people knew him, man. And there's a little bit of guitar stuff. Cropper, I never got to work with him. I did get a call to play for his 60th birthday party. That was how long ago that was. And when I was living in Nashville, and I couldn't do it because I was on tour. And man, I got to see him a lot of times. He sat in with the Neville brothers, and I would run into him at the airport in Nashville when I, was living there. And he was always very nice. And I remember he told me that he produced a Jeff Beck maybe not a whole record, but at least half a record, and it kind of didn't go well. I don't want to talk about stuff I don't know the full story, but who knows where those tracks are. Hey, if you like this, you like all this gab and these little playing things, let me know. I'm trying to keep the channel loose. I don't want it to get too produced, man. I see some of my friends, and they just let it roll with an iPhone, and seems to do great, because it takes a lot of work to do one of these videos. I just don't have the time to do it. So I hope you'd still dig it. I hope you guys will still watch. I'm still going to do it. Don't worry. I'm going to try to do some like live footage stuff. I have a session at Sunset Sound tomorrow, and I'm going to bring the camera and maybe get some footage like that. So, hey, like, subscribe. I'll see you guys soon. Stay funky. Shane T out.